The flowers were expensive, the linens imported, and the guest list approved by Margaret 3 times over. My name was on the invitation, but the wedding never felt like mine. It was her show, her moment. I was simply the accessory at the end of the aisle. Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he did and didn't care. He smiled in all the right places, held my hand during the photo session, and whispered, "We made it," before the first dance. But when his mother took over the mic to give a 10-minute speech about how she'd raised a man any woman would be lucky to marry, without mentioning me once, I realized exactly where I stood. Not beside him, beneath them. From the moment we returned from the honeymoon, reality took root. Margaret had organized our home while we were away. My kitchen was rearranged, my closet emptied of anything she deemed too casual, and Sabrina had moved herself into our guest room temporarily while her condo underwent renovations. That temporary stay stretched into months. "You don't mind, do you?" Margaret asked breezily over brunch one Sunday, handing me a stack of dishes to wash. "You're so tidy." Daniel, seated beside her, sipped his coffee and didn't look up. The family had a way of speaking about me like I wasn't there, like I was an employee, a live-in assistant. I began noticing how I was never asked about my thoughts, only assigned tasks. I ironed Daniel's shirts, prepped Margaret's event canapes, drove Sabrina to her weekly appointments. All of it done with a quiet smile, because the alternative was worse. Raised eyebrows, pointed silences, reminders about how grateful I should be. I told myself this was temporary, that love would eventually outweigh tradition. But each week blurred into the next. Daniel stopped asking about my day. Margaret started calling our house the family estate again, and Sabrina referred to our dining room as her side of the table. When I brought it up to Daniel one night, he shrugged. "You know how they are?" Yes, I was starting to, and they had made one thing very clear. I was here, but I didn't belong. It started subtly, comments wrapped in silk, coated in faux concern. Sabrina, flicking through a magazine at breakfast, "You know, Daniel used to date real estate heiresses. Gorgeous ones." Margaret, arranging flowers in the living room. "Not everyone from your kind of background adjusts well to this lifestyle." I'd been married 3 months when Margaret pulled me aside in the hallway. No preamble, no soft landing. "You're not really a wife," she said, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her cashmere cardigan. "You're the maid who married my son." I said nothing. I'd learned silence was safer than protest. She took that as agreement. "You're lucky he even married you," she added with a clipped smile. "Most men in his position wouldn't look twice." It was a strange thing to be told in my own home, the one Daniel and I had technically picked together. But each day made it less mine. I decorated our bedroom with warm neutrals and soft textures. Margaret had them swapped out for blue silk and lacquered wood within a week. "Daniel prefers a cooler palette," she'd said. They didn't argue. They erased, quietly, efficiently, and always with a smile. When family came over, I became the server, the cleaner, the woman who poured wine but was never offered a glass, the one who stayed on her feet while the rest of them sat and laughed at stories I wasn't invited to understand. One afternoon, I overheard Sabrina on the phone with a friend. She cooks and cleans like a dream. Honestly, it's like Daniel married a live-in housekeeper. Must be nice. My stomach turned, but I kept folding laundry. By then, I'd stopped reacting. Daniel never corrected them. When I told him how it felt, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "They just come from a different world." So did I. One where respect was mutual and kindness wasn't conditional. But I'd stopped explaining myself. Their dismissal wasn't personal, it was systemic. Margaret didn't want a daughter-in-law, she wanted staff. Sabrina didn't want a sister, she wanted someone beneath her. And Daniel, he didn't want to choose. So I smiled, I served, I watched, and I waited. They thought I was compliant, but I was just getting ready. I started recording things the night Margaret accidentally spilled red wine on my blouse at dinner. It was my favorite silk top. Ivory, delicate, a gift from my sister. Margaret laughed it off. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Leah. It's just a shirt." Sabrina giggled into her glass. Daniel said nothing. After everyone left, I found the bottle still half full, the stain too precise, the moment too convenient. That night, I downloaded a voice recording app and started leaving my phone on when they visited. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Margaret's offhand comments, Sabrina's thinly veiled insults, even Daniel's placating responses. I kept them all. I saved text messages, calendar invites I wasn't supposed to see, photos of bruises on plates I'd dropped after being startled by sudden shouts. Nothing physical, but everything psychological. Over time, the pattern sharpened. I wasn't imagining it. And Daniel wasn't just blind to it. He was complicit. "You shouldn't antagonize them," he whispered one evening after his mother snapped at me for putting out the wrong serving spoons. "You know how easily they get upset." "I put out silver instead of gold," I replied flatly. He shrugged. "It matters to her." I realized then, Margaret didn't have to raise her voice. Daniel would do it for her, softly, privately, with a hand on my shoulder and disappointment in his eyes. Sabrina didn't have to attack me directly. She just needed to roll hers, and Daniel would offer me advice on how to connect better with his sister. The final straw came at another one of Margaret's never-ending dinners. Sabrina had invited friends without telling me. I'd spent hours preparing a 3-course meal, only to be told to wait and serve while they dined and laughed in the next room. I wasn't even introduced. Later, in the kitchen, Daniel leaned against the counter. "I know tonight wasn't ideal, but you could have handled it with more grace." I looked at him, really looked. His cufflinks were the ones I'd gifted him last Christmas. He hadn't thanked me. Not once. I smiled, wiped my hands on a towel, and said nothing. But inside, something cold and focused began to take shape. And I finally stopped hoping he'd choose me. The change was so subtle, even they didn't notice at first. I still smiled, still served tea exactly the way Margaret liked it. Strong, no sugar. Still took Sabrina's passive-aggressive jabs without flinching. But I stopped reacting, stopped trying to explain myself, stopped hoping anyone in that house would see me as more than a well-trained accessory. I became quiet, observant, efficient. And while they mistook my silence for surrender, I started planning. At night, while Daniel slept beside me, I reactivated an old email account linked to a portfolio I hadn't touched since college. Before marriage, before Margaret, before I started shrinking myself to fit someone else's family mold, I had been a top student in interior architecture. I'd turned down a firm offer after our engagement. Daniel had promised we'd build something better together. We never did. I dug through old storage bins in the attic and found my design notebooks, sketches, and floor plans still crisp and clean. My mentor's contact information was scribbled in the margins of a syllabus. Evelyn Rhodes, a woman I once admired so much I nearly followed her to New York before love rerouted my plans. I emailed her that night, brief, direct. "Hi Evelyn, this is Leah Weston, formerly Leah Morgan. I studied under you 5 years ago. I'm reaching out now because I think I'm ready to begin again." She replied within hours, "Of course I remember you. Let's talk." Our call was short, but her words landed like anchors. "You were one of the most promising minds I taught, Leah. Whatever derailed you, it's not permanent." I didn't correct her. She didn't need the details. That week, I created a business plan and a second email alias, registered a DBA, set up a private Dropbox folder. I used the hours they expected me to be cooking and folding and vacuuming to research, sketch, and build something of my own. I became 2 women, the quiet, composed wife with perfect posture and the sharp, focused professional working quietly from the shadows. Margaret once said, I'd never survive on my own. She was wrong. And when the time came, I wouldn't just survive, I would outshine every single one of them. It started with a single post, A new Instagram account under the name L. Weston Design. No photos of me, no identifying details, just clean before and afters of organized pantries, redesigned living rooms, and minimal captions that hinted at luxury without being obvious. I chose the name carefully. L.A. for Leah. Weston for Daniel's surname. A subtle irony. Within a week, I had my first inquiry from one of Margaret's acquaintances who'd been to a garden party I'd helped organize. "I heard you do home styling and efficiency setups," she messaged, discreetly. That word, discreet, was key. These women didn't want to admit their lives were cluttered behind the curated images, but they were desperate for control, and I offered it. Quietly, elegantly, without judgment. I started offering weekend services, one-room refreshes, storage redesigns, a full service package that included everything from layout sketches to product sourcing. My rate was higher than average. It didn't matter. They paid, and then they told their friends. I worked out of other people's homes at first, brought my own tools, my own sketchbooks. Daniel thought I was volunteering for charity events. Margaret assumed I was finally finding a purpose. "She does love tidying up," she told a neighbor once, not knowing I'd just charged that neighbor $1,800 for a 2-day redesign of her dressing room. What they didn't realize was that I was using them, their friends, their parties, their endless need for appearances, as my client pipeline. My designs started showing up in the background of their brunch photos. My name spread quietly through wine-fueled conversations behind gated hedges. By the end of the second month, L. Weston Design had booked out 6 weeks in advance. I opened a business account, transferred earnings to an online savings platform Daniel didn't know existed. Every contract I signed was carefully documented, signed through DocuSign under my pseudonym. Daniel once said I should find a hobby. I'd found a business. And with every booking, every invoice, every subtle name drop in elite circles, I built the one thing Margaret's approval could never give me: independence. They still thought I was polishing silver, folding linens, and steaming napkins. And I was, just not for them anymore. They say power reveals itself in the loudest voices. I disagree. Real power is quiet, undetectable. It slips in through the back door while everyone's watching the front. I became invisible by design. Margaret's invisible assistant, Sabrina's errand runner, Daniel's afterthought. And in that invisibility, I found freedom. The estate's old carriage house sat empty, once used for guests, now forgotten. Margaret hated its drafty floors and aging windows. No one with taste would stay in there, she'd said. Perfect. I started spending evenings there under the guise of reorganizing storage. I'd light candles, play soft jazz, and sketch. Bit by bit, I transformed the space, painted the walls a soft matte charcoal, refinished the floors, installed secondhand shelving units, and filled them with fabric swatches, layout prints, client folders. It wasn't just a workspace. It was mine. While Margaret redecorated the main house for the 3rd time that year, I was drawing blueprints for kitchens in mansions 2 zip codes over. While Daniel binged sports in the den, I was balancing books, running spreadsheets, tracking my steadily climbing revenue. And in the background, I began gathering everything I'd need for my eventual departure. I located our prenup and read every line. I took photos of the inheritance trust Margaret had once bragged about, which Daniel had conveniently forgotten to explain. I reviewed household contracts, utilities, property tax forms. I noted what was legally his, what was joint, and, more importantly, what had always been mine. I scanned documents late at night, saved them to encrypted folders, backed them up twice. I left nothing to chance. During the day, I still played the role. I arranged flowers. I picked up dry cleaning. I served tea with a smile while mentally cross-referencing asset clauses. "You've really settled into your place, Leah," Margaret remarked one morning, watching me carry in groceries. She didn't see the ring on my finger had been replaced with a silicone band. She didn't see that I now owned more leverage than any of them realized. I just smiled. Let them think I was content, domestic, tamed. The less they suspected, the more time I had to prepare. Because when I walked away, it wouldn't be with bitterness. It would be with everything they thought I'd never have. The party was extravagant, even by Margaret's standards. Crystal candle holders, a live string quartet, imported oysters flown in from Maine, and me placing last-minute name cards on the gilded dinner table while Sabrina floated around in Valentino, taking credit for everything I'd done. She just loves hosting, Margaret gushed to guests. A real natural, like her grandmother. Sabrina smiled sweetly and clinked glasses with someone important. I stayed in the shadows. That's where they liked me, where I did my best work. After dessert, while I was collecting champagne flutes near the open French doors, I caught her voice. "She's basically a glorified maid," Sabrina said, laughing. "I mean, yes, she married Daniel, but come on, she cleans, she cooks, she organizes. I keep waiting for her to show up in a uniform." Her friends tittered. "And don't get me started on her business," she added with air quotes. "Some side hustle for bored wives, I'm sure. God, the delusion." I didn't flinch. I didn't even look up. Instead, I noted who her friends were. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy sheath dress, didn't laugh. She watched me instead. Later that evening, she approached me at the kitchen island, where I was quietly labeling takeaway bags. "I overheard your sister-in-law," she said, her voice low, "but I've also seen the before and afters on your design page. You're the one behind L. Weston, aren't you?" I hesitated. "That depends who's asking." She smiled. "Someone interested in investing." Her name was Valerie Chen, a private equity partner with a focus on boutique service ventures for high-net-worth households. She had just sold a luxury concierge business and was looking for her next project. "You've tapped into something real," she said, "a discreet, high-touch service for women who don't want to advertise chaos in their lives. I can double your reach overnight." I gave her a card. The next day, we met for coffee. Within a week, she became my silent partner. We signed NDAs. She wired the capital, and L. Weston Design became L. Weston Collective, with a new wait list, a private referral system, and a newly hired assistant to manage scheduling. While Sabrina bragged about her party's floral arrangements, I secured 5 new clients from her guest list. She served humiliation. I turned it into a business model. Valerie didn't just have money, she had reach. Discretion was her currency, and connections her language. 2 weeks after our agreement, Ella Weston Collective was featured anonymously in a members-only newsletter circulated among elite circles. It was a single sentence. "For those seeking home organization with confidentiality and class, L. Weston delivers." By the end of the week, we'd received 23 inquiries. Valerie curated the clients personally, selecting only those whose properties and public image aligned with our aesthetic. And what I hadn't realized, what Valerie hadn't mentioned until our second strategy meeting, was that she also sat on the advisory board of the investment firm managing Daniel's company's expansion fund. "So," she said over a glass of Pinot, "your husband's firm is pitching for Series C funding. I assume he doesn't know we're acquainted." "He still thinks I alphabetize throw pillows for fun," I replied. She smiled. The next week, Daniel came home agitated. His numbers weren't being received well. The board wanted a revised pitch deck. Someone had flagged inconsistencies in the market analysis. "Politics," he muttered. "They're moving the goalposts." I listened, sympathetic. I asked questions I already knew the answers to. Valerie wasn't sabotaging him. She didn't need to. She simply wasn't impressed. And in her world, indifference was more dangerous than opposition. Meanwhile, I focused on scale. I signed 2 elite design consultants under the L. Weston Collective umbrella, launched a quarterly subscription package for seasonal resets, and booked out the next 3 months. I hired a CPA. I trademarked the brand, all under a name Daniel didn't recognize. I started wearing a new watch, sleek, minimal, rose gold. "New?" he asked one morning, half paying attention. "A client gift," I replied, sipping my coffee. He nodded, distracted. "Chess, not checkers." They thought I was playing house while they built legacies. But I was building mine, brick by brick, backed by capital they'd never see coming. Daniel paced in meetings. Margaret griped about rumors of layoffs. Sabrina complained about Valerie's disinterest at the club. No one connected the dots. They'd made me invisible, and I had learned to make invisibility leverage. My birthday fell on a Saturday that year. Spring air, clear skies, tulips blooming outside the sunroom window. No one said a word, no card, no breakfast, no flowers, no happy birthday from Daniel. He left early for golf with his colleague, something Margaret had coordinated, of course. I found a handwritten note on the kitchen counter in her signature cursive. "Leah, please prepare canapes for the Sunday luncheon. Polish the silver and steam the green tablecloth. Sabrina needs her dress picked up from the tailor. M." No greeting, no acknowledgement. I smiled. Then I rolled up my sleeves and did every task perfectly. The canapes were balanced and hand-piped. The silver shone like mirrors. Sabrina's dress was returned in a garment bag with tissue-stuffed sleeves. I finished everything by 4 p.m. and returned to the carriage house. At 7 o'clock, I poured myself a glass of wine and printed a single sheet of paper. "Daniel, everything you've asked of me, I've done. What you never asked is who I am without all of it. You'll learn soon enough. Leah." I folded it neatly and placed it on his nightstand. By 9 p.m., the carriage house was clean, dark, and empty. My sketches, contracts, notebooks, and equipment had been boxed and moved earlier in the week. The storage unit downtown had already been paid for 3 months in advance. The key was in my bag. I didn't cry, not once. I locked the door behind me, took one last look at the estate from the end of the gravel driveway, and got in the rideshare that would take me to the hotel where I'd booked a 2-week executive suite under the name Ella Weston. Not one person texted, not one person called. It was my birthday, and I'd just given myself the best gift of all, an exit. By morning, the messages began. First from Daniel. "Where are you? Are you okay? I think something's wrong. Call me." Then from Margaret. "This isn't funny. You have responsibilities here. At least have the decency to say goodbye." I didn't respond. My absence was louder than any confrontation. Sabrina sent a single text 2 hours later. "Wow, so you're just walking out now? After everything? You're welcome, BTW, for the party I was planning." There was no party. They never planned anything unless it made them look good. Daniel tried calling that afternoon, then again at midnight, 5 times the next day. He left voicemails that shifted from concern to annoyance to desperation. "You're being dramatic. Let's just talk. We can fix this." But I had nothing left to say. Silence is power when it follows a pattern of being ignored. Margaret called my mother. My mother told her politely that I was an adult and owed her nothing. They weren't used to silence. They were used to control, to performance, to explanations they could twist into ammunition. Without a target, they were unarmed. I monitored everything through a private line. Emails, voicemails, bank accounts, shared cloud storage. Daniel hadn't noticed I'd removed myself from everything weeks ago. Margaret emailed me directly. "Leah, this isn't like you. We understand you're upset, but this is hardly the mature way to handle disappointment. You were treated with generosity. You had a place here. Be reasonable and come home." I archived it. They never saw the erosion because they were always looking for fireworks. But I'd left like fog clearing at sunrise. Software. Steady. Absolute. And in the stillness that followed, they began to unravel. Let me know when you're ready for chapters 11 and 12. The unraveling accelerates. The article was titled "Elegance in Silence: The Rise of L. Weston." A full spread in a national design magazine. Photos of light-drenched interiors, meticulous storage solutions, curated luxury minimalism. a feature on boutique designers catering to discreet high-net-worth clients. No photo of me, just words, my words. The best design isn't loud, it's lived. Ella Weston's work transforms space into stillness, a sense of order, control, and grace. Margaret was the first to see it. She kept a subscription, of course. Presentation mattered more than principles. The morning it arrived, I imagined her opening it with her usual ritual: coffee, silk robe, knife-sharp judgment. I wasn't there to see her face, but I got a text from Sabrina. Did you seriously use a fake name to start a business? Do you even realize how embarrassing this is for our family? It was the first time she'd ever referred to me as family. I didn't respond. By noon, the group chats in their social circles had lit up. The maid they had dismissed was designing estates in the hills. Their acquaintances were whispering. Their status symbols now included my work. One of Margaret's oldest frenemies, Eleanor Royce, reached out through the L. Weston contact form. I'm interested in a redesign. Discreet, of course. I saw your feature. Stunning work. I scheduled a consult. When I arrived at Eleanor's gated home in Bellevue Heights, she was waiting at the door in heels and pearls. You know, she said, ushering me in, I always said Margaret lacked vision. Seems I was right. She hired me on the spot for twice my usual rate. The next week, I booked 2 more projects through Eleanor's network. Daniel's surname no longer held me back. It opened doors. Not because of him, because of what I'd done in spite of him. They called me invisible. Now I was everywhere, and all it took was becoming who I'd been all along, without needing them to see it. They arrived unannounced. Margaret, Sabrina, and Daniel, tense-jawed, hands in pockets, avoiding eye contact. It was a Tuesday morning, and my studio smelled like bergamot and leather. Soft jazz played in the background. My assistant glanced up from her laptop and mouthed, "Do you want me to call security?" I shook my head. "Leah," Margaret began, as if this were a social call. "We need to talk." They stood in a perfect triangle, Margaret clutching her purse like a shield, Sabrina visibly seething, Daniel looking like he hadn't slept in days. I gestured toward the seating area. They didn't sit. "You made us look like fools," Sabrina snapped. "You blindsided us. You used our name, our connections." "I used my work," I interrupted. Calm. "My time, my designs, my labor, you gave me nothing." Daniel finally spoke. "You could have just told us you were unhappy." "I did," I replied. "For years. You just didn't listen." Margaret's mask slipped for a moment. "You left no explanation, just vanished. What were we supposed to think?" "That maybe I finally realized I wasn't your maid," I said evenly. "That maybe I was never just that." I stood, letting the silence stretch. "I want to thank you," I said. "All of you, for the dismissal, for the disregard, for the constant quiet erasure. It made me build something you can't touch." Margaret's jaw tightened. Sabrina looked like she wanted to scream. Daniel's voice dropped. "Are you doing this to punish us?" "No," I said. "I'm doing this because I finally remembered who I was before you convinced me I wasn't enough." They didn't expect the peace in my voice. They expected rage, regret. They got none. "I'm booked 6 months out," I added. "Unless you need help organizing the pantry, I'd recommend scheduling online." No, Sabrina scoffed. Margaret turned on her heel. Daniel lingered for a beat longer. "You really don't want to talk?" "I think I just did." They walked out, defeated by something they never understood. I didn't win by yelling, I won by leaving, and building something beautiful in the space they left behind. It unraveled faster than I expected. 3 months after the confrontation at my studio, Daniel's company announced internal restructuring. Then came a leaked memo, a quietly retracted press release, and finally the news. Daniel was being let go. No formal statement, no farewell luncheon, just a box of personal items and a revoked key card. Rumors spread fast in their circles. There had been discrepancies in reporting, unexplained project expenses, investor dissatisfaction. One backer had pulled out abruptly, citing misaligned values. That backer was Valerie Chen. She never said a word to me. She didn't need to. Daniel never connected the dots, just assumed it was office politics. Bad luck. The board scapegoating him. He never considered that being dismissive, performative, and reckless with resources might eventually come at a cost. He moved back in with Margaret 2 weeks later. Sabrina posted a throwback photo on social media that week, her smiling with their father at a yacht club event. No mention of Daniel. Margaret, for all her cruelty, couldn't hide her disappointment. She still hosted brunches, but Daniel was no longer the golden son with potential. Now he was transitioning between roles. A man in his mid-30s sleeping in his childhood bedroom. He called me once. Voicemail flat. Just wanted to check in. Hope you're well. Things have been complicated lately. I didn't respond. He was starting to learn something I'd understood long before he lost his job. Charm might open doors, but character keeps them open. The house was listed quietly, no fanfare, no open houses, just a quiet line on a private real estate network, historic Whitmore estate. 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, distressed. Cash buyers preferred. It had been in Margaret's family for 3 generations, the crown jewel of their name. But a bad refinance, some deferred maintenance, and a market dip had left it vulnerable. I wired the down payment within 48 hours. 3 months later, it reopened as the Whitmore Retreat, a luxury wellness and design experience for women recovering from toxic relationships. Spa suites, restorative design workshops, private therapy spaces flooded with natural light. Every detail was intentional. The grand staircase Margaret once bragged about, now the backdrop for meditation sessions. The formal dining room, a studio space where survivors painted their boundaries, literally and figuratively. A local lifestyle magazine did a full feature, From Wounds to Walls, how one designer turned a family's downfall into a safe haven for women, finding themselves again. The quote they pulled for the headline? Sometimes healing begins when we stop asking for permission to exist. Ella Weston. They didn't know my real name, but Margaret did. She saw the article over brunch, flipping through the magazine with her usual barely veiled disdain, until the property photos stopped her cold. The front gates, the sunroom, the estate crest carved above the fireplace, now painted white with a fresh wreath hanging beneath it. Her silence, I imagine, was deafening. She had once said I'd never leave a mark. Now she couldn't flip a page without seeing it. And unlike the family name she'd weaponized for decades, mine had become a symbol of something she could never control: freedom. The ballroom shimmered in gold and candlelight. Over 300 women filled the seats, executives, entrepreneurs, creatives, and quiet revolutionaries in tailored blazers and heels with purpose. I stood backstage, a microphone clipped to my collar, palm steady. It had been 1 year since I walked out of Daniel's estate. 1 year since I'd traded silence for strength and servitude for sovereignty. Now I was the closing keynote at a women's leadership summit titled Built to Rise. They introduced me as Elle Weston, designer, founder, strategist, investor in women-led ventures. What they didn't say, but what I would, was that I was once the woman folding napkins while her name was forgotten. Once the invisible thread holding a crumbling legacy together. Once the one who was told, "You're just the maid who married my son." I walked to the podium. No notes. I didn't need them. "Thank you," I began, scanning the crowd. Not just for being here, but for becoming the kind of women younger versions of us needed to see. A pause. Some of you know my story, others may not. I'll summarize it like this. I was underestimated, often, repeatedly, systematically, and it nearly worked, until I remembered who I was before I asked for anyone's permission to matter. Soft nods rippled through the crowd. I was told I was just a helper, just a wife. I took that just and turned it into an empire. Because the thing about being underestimated is that it becomes your sharpest blade, if you learn how to use it. Behind me, a slideshow showed glimpses of the Whitmore retreat, spaces rebuilt with intention, women learning to live without apology. I didn't scream to be seen. I built something they couldn't look away from. I saw heads lifting, shoulders squaring. My final message is simple, I said, letting my voice land softly but firmly. If someone tries to shrink you down to what they think you are, outgrow them, outbuild them, outlast them. The room rose in applause, not explosive but resonant, like something real had shifted. I stepped back, feeling the quiet power of everything I'd become. Not a maid, not just a wife, a force. And finally, the world knew it too. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.